Hey, this is Pastor Ron, and here is our overflow question for today. With being intentional, how do you know when you found your people or the place you're supposed to be? I don't want to over spiritualize this, but I don't want to kind of ignore, I think, some of the tangible aspects of your question. But I want to say this, your spiritual life is the most important aspect of your life. So I have to answer it from that perspective. And I think that some of the tangible things that you may be looking for in regard to an answer to this will flow out of this. So I want to take you to Matthew chapter 12 at verse number 46. Jesus is in a house with his disciples, and Jesus's mother, Mary, and his brothers come to the house and they want to speak to him. So a guy comes to the door, sees Jesus' mother out there and his brothers, that they want to speak to him. And he comes in and he says to Jesus, hey, your mother and your brothers are outside. They want to speak to you. Jesus then says, well, who is my mother and who are my brothers? He points to his disciples and he says, these are my mothers and my brothers. Those who do the will of my Father are my mother, my brothers, my sisters. So I want you to know that when it comes to who are your people, those who are doing the will of God, those are your people, because those are Jesus's people. If they're doing God's will, then that's the people that you belong to. As far as your place, God's will is your place. In fact, God's will is the safest place for you to be. Now, I know that you might be asking, okay, Pastor Ron, well, how do I know God's will? I'm so glad that you asked that question. I want to share the answer with you, but I want to warn you, it's simple, but it's not easy. There's a difference between simple and easy. Like walking a straight line from point A to point B can be very simple, but if that line is 10 miles, it may not be easy depending on what kind of shape you're in. So I want to share with you a text from Romans 12, verse number 2. It says this, do not conform to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. So when it comes to discerning God's will, the beginning of that is not conforming to the patterns of this world. What does that mean? So it means that the ways of the world, the way the world thinks, the way the world does things, which are very different than how God thinks and how he does things, that you stay away from how the world thinks. I'll give you a prime example. The world thinks that meekness is weakness. However, God thinks that meekness is a character trait of great value. Jesus said, the meek shall inherit the earth. So one of the first things you want to begin to do to ensure that you don't conform to the patterns of this world is to immerse yourself in the things of God. You want to immerse yourself in his word. You want to immerse yourself in his presence, and you want to immerse yourself in his people. The word will be the first thing that helps you to transform your mind. So imagine if right now your idea of meekness is the same as the world, that someone who's meek is really weak. Well, then when you get to the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5, and Jesus is teaching the Beatitudes, and he says, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Then you start to change your mind because you're saying, hey, meekness is okay with God. Then when you spend time in God's presence, every time you spend time in God's presence, you take a little bit of his character with you. It's very much like when Moses was on the mountain, on Mount Sinai with God for 40 days. One of those instances in which he did that, he came down and his face was glowing. Why? Because he just spent 40 days in the presence of the God of light. And as he was there, some of who God is was attached to Moses. It's the same way for us. When we spend time in God's presence, we pull away some of who God is. Some of that becomes a part of us, and it helps you to train or transform your mind. And then when you're spending time with God's people, and remember what Jesus said, God's people, your people, are those who are doing the Father's will. Well, when you spend time with them, talking about the Father's will, you spend time with them doing the Father's will, then you have a greater understanding of what that will is. And ultimately what this immersion leads to, it leads to the place where you are able to discern even better what God's will is, and so much better what God's will is not. So your people are God's people, those who do the will of the Father, and your place, your Father's will. All right, this has been Pastor Ron, Overflow. I will see you again next Monday. Peace, love you, God bless.